In the eyes of time, all is rust. First, let me say welcome to Love, Death, and Dice. My name is Blake Rea. Something happened to me this week. I screwed up a paint job. Really badly. It's not the first time this has happened, and it sure won't be the last, but rather than cutting it out of the video completely, I want to show you what went wrong and how I went about fixing it. Nothing shows death and decay quite like rust. It represents time, stagnation, even disease to a certain degree, which is perfect for my next Night Haunt project. The idea is I want to paint a ghost made of rust. Simple concept, right? No. Crack open your favorite ghost models and get to work building them. I'm using Bladegheist Revenants. This might sound like heresy, but I don't really care about the mold lines for this project. You'll know why in a sec. This is where my first real decision came in. Normally you use the metal masks included in the kit, but I'm afraid if all of the items on the model are the same material, everything will disappear into each other and it'll just look like a blob of rust. I've got hundreds of these Citadel Skulls. Might as well use them. And boy does that look creepy as hell. I didn't know this going into this project, but did you know that there are 3 different kinds of rust, each with their own definitions of decay? To achieve the effects of all 3, I'm going to be using a combination of texture paints, AK Interactive's Corrosion texture, Typhus Corrosion, and finally, Mordant Earth. I use the Corrosion texture over the bulk of the model to roughen its form as well as the contact points between the base of the blade and the hilt. For the finer areas of the model, such as the chains, I use Typhus Corrosion. The grit in the paint is much smaller, allowing me to break up the crevices of these areas without destroying them. To give these ghosties one final touch of decay, each of their backs got a dollop of Mordant Earth. When this dries, it'll crack and give the appearance of flaking and pitted metal. These boys are looking sexy, and now you can see why cleaning mold lines isn't such a big deal. But all good things must come to an end, and this is where the project turned into a real shitstorm. Outside, I spray primed the minis black. Over that, they received a coat of aluminum spray. Mistake number 1. My idea here was to get a base of all that shiny metal that I can age up later with effects paint and inks. Little did I know, a silver undercoat creates a bronzy rust rather than the saturated red rust I was going for. Back inside, I used some drops of Vallejo inks to create a brownish gold mixture and covered the whole model to age it up. Mistake number 2. Big shock! The gold mixture turned my models into more of a tarnished gold. It's a cool effect that I'm gonna keep in my back pocket, but gold doesn't tarnish the same way as iron or steel. Maybe we can fix it after we apply the dirty down rust effects. You already know the answer to that. Mistake number 3. What undercoat you pick for this paint is beyond important. The brightness and hue of the effect is dictated by what color you pick to go beneath it. By having a dark gold undercoat, the effect was nearly unseen. Yeah, it added touches of brown, but where are those rich oranges and reds we all think about when we think rust? I later ran some tests to see if this was true. This is the rust effect on a piece of terrain that was painted with different primers. The effect is barely noticeable on the black parts, while the silver has a brownish look with hints of bright metal coming through. The white, on the other hand, is a rich red. It doesn't have the flakes of silver coming through, but with a little dry brushing, we can add that in. When I'm in the thick of it like this, I can be a pretty bullheaded guy. Either because I thought I could still save these models, or because I refused to admit defeat, I kept going. Maybe if I dialed back the browns with silver and added in some oranges, that would help. Using Stormhost Silver and Riza Rust, I dry brushed on the latter and stippled the former. Mistake number 4. If anything, this made it look worse. The silver over the gold doesn't work, and Riza Rust looks like orange vomit. And this is where the frustration really kicked in, and I began debating if this whole project was like a mistake, you know? Directionless, I took a moment to relax and reviewed some example images of rust to see how I could emulate it. I remembered that when rust gets really bad, it starts to shed oxidized dust. Seeing an opportunity to try something new, I picked up a couple of Vallejo pigments from the nearby hobby store and dusted the top parts of the models with oxidized rust and the tails with carbon black. To lock the pigment in place, I used airbrush thinner. The idea is to load up your brush and through capillary action, the thinner will spread and dry the pigment into place. Mistake number 5. In theory, that's what I thought I did. In reality, it made most of my pigment pool at the bottom of the model. Some of the effect stayed on, but most just slid off. I could go on and on about all of the other mistakes I made, but you get the point. nothing is going to save these models other than starting over. Trying new techniques is wonderful when it works, but there's always the chance that things can go wrong. And that could be wicked frustrating because you don't understand why things failed until much later. But like I said earlier, I don't give up easy, and I still learned a crap ton by failing. Let's start over and make these ghosts better than ever. Fix number 1. I want the super saturated red rust from my prior tests, so I primed the minis white this time. I had half an idea to do a zenithal prime to give the rust effect some different undercoats to interact with, but knowing my luck this week, I thought better of it. Fix number 2. During my tests, I noticed the metallic undercoat, though not the color I wanted, caught the light in interesting ways. To distinguish the weapons and arms from the rusty cloak, I gave them a layer of heavy metal and necrogold. Again, I had half the mind to drop the rust project and make a marble statue ghost. Maybe next time. We've done our research and prep. Now that all of the proper base coats are down, this rust effect should work. And it did. I finally have that rich oxidized red I've been hunting for, and all of the other undercoats take this effect in their own way, giving the model pieces their own personality. One thing to keep in mind if you want to preserve some of the metallic's shininess underneath the rust, wipe away some of it with your finger. Enough was left behind to keep it sharp and silver while still having that hint of tetanus. I should have done the same thing to protect the hooks. That shit's gone. If you're in the market for a good rust paint that truly looks realistic, I would recommend Dirty Down Rust Effects. Be warned though, this stuff is like 30 bucks? Expensive? Yeah. Does it make my job easier, quicker, and more convincing overall? Oh yeah. Fix mistake number, I don't know. In tradition with the rest of my Night Hunt army, the tails need to be darker than the face of the model. Rather than using a pigment powder like I did on my failed model, I used Nuln Oil. Be careful to not let this stuff pool though. It could rehydrate the rust effect, revealing your undercoat beneath, and we hate that. Fix number 3. All that's left on this model is to bring out the sharp details and to remind the viewer that this is rusted metal. Using a faint amount of Stormhost silver, I dry brushed all of the raised areas. This brings out the detail on the cloak, tails, and hood edge. Like my Blood Phantoms, I wanted the bases to be a cooler color as to not distract from the warm tones above. After applying some Astrogranite, I based it in Petroleum Gray and gave it a dry brush of Rainy Gray all over and then Nacar at its edges. Give it a couple leaves and dabs of moss, sponged with Typhus Corrosion, and you're done. Mistake number 6, but not really. You thought it was over? Ha! When I tackled the new model, I started over completely, which cost me a day of drying time. But later I realized I could just spray over the old models and do my new workflow. I'm not perfect, but hey, at least my models are complete. Oof, lots of mistakes this episode, but that's miniature painting, baby. I hope that by showing you the amount of mistakes I made this episode, you can see that this process isn't perfect and that you don't need to know everything to get started on an idea that makes you happy. And worst case scenario, you can always begin again. It's only paint and plastic. There are many more screw-ups to be had, so make sure to subscribe and check in every now and again in the comments below. Hell, tell me the worst mistake you've made while mini painting and what you did to fix it. If you want your name in the credits or you just want to get a little flirty and sell your soul, consider joining my cult on Patreon. Thank you to all the lovely people that have joined thus far. Till next time, go fuck up and have fun doing it.